Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. We're currently reading Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy. And it's a marvelously instructive and informative book about the founding of the United States of America, the Revolutionary War, and the establishment of our government, and the role that the Vatican and the Jesuits played. It's a rather stark revelation to me, and I consider this book an important book. It's a matter of heated debate amongst the researchers into the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, and it's information that should be considered and added to our database. Now, we're going to begin in Chapter 16, which is entitled Tweaking the Religious Right. And, oh, by the way, let me give you a brief program report here. Monday, I'm not going to be on the broadcast. I have other plans that I can't get out of. I hate to miss the program, but Nicholas will have something potted up for you that'll be interesting and educational. So just letting my listeners know ahead of time. And then Nicholas and I have discussed doing a series of broadcasts having to do with how each and every one of us are encumbered with this Romanized church state that we live in. And we're going to talk a little bit about Bible prophecy, and we're probably going to talk a little bit about the law, the Constitution, and God's holy law. And it should be very educational. It should take place over a series of consecutive Wednesdays. Now, I know Nicholas is awful busy, so these are tentative plans, but scheduled next Wednesday will be the first interview of Nicholas Arthur of Cross the Border on Inquisition Update, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I don't know specifically what we'll talk about, but I'm sure the Holy Spirit will lead and guide and direct, and the audience will be educated and enlightened and edified. So please mark down your calendar. Next Wednesday will be the first interview. And I'll see you back on the broadcast live Tuesday, having Monday other obligations to meet. Now, back to the book, Rulers of Evil, Chapter 16, Tweaking the Religious Right. Remember, we're fomenting a revolution of the colonies away from Great Britain. And the Jesuits, through Freemasonry, are working diligently on both sides, both in the colonies and Great Britain, to foment this separation, to foment the Revolutionary War. And now we're going to see how the Jesuit general tipped the religious right to act in a way that was consistent with his plan for the New World. It says, as the furor over the Stamp Act was cooling down, the Jesuits of Maryland and Pennsylvania discovered that the director of Catholic operations in the British colonies, Bishop Richard Challoner, had asked Rome to ordain an American bishop. The American Jesuits disliked the idea. Father Ferdinand Steinmeier, alias Farmer of New York, cautioned Bishop Challoner, quote, "It is incredible how hateful to non-Catholics in all parts of America is the very name bishop," unquote. Now remember that the colonies were predominantly Protestant. Many of them were Quakers, and the name escapes me, for crying out loud. I'll think of it in a minute. But they rejected the hierarchical structure of both the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, which could barely be called Protestant. they believed that Christ was the head of the church and we were all brethren. They had a biblical approach to their philosophies and the desirable form of government, and they fled Great Britain because of the religious persecution both of the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England. And the word bishop was a curse word to them. The church hierarchical structure was a burden and a pestilence. And they left Great Britain, they left Europe and religious persecution to be free of all that. And now they want to ordain a bishop for the new colonies. And, of course, there was an uproar about it. He says, still, in Challoner's view, an American bishop would establish better order in the colonies, restore discipline, and make it possible for colonial Catholics to be confirmed. So we're talking about the church structure, the church tradition, confirmation, and that the Catholic structure would best be served by having a bishop in the colonies. He says Steinmeier and his American brethren strenuously opposed the idea on grounds that it would only make life among Protestants more difficult for Catholics. In other words, it would incite anti-Catholic fervor in this country by the Protestants, an agitation to ordain a bishop for the colonies. He said they collected lay support for their views and asked Challoner himself to forward the protest to Rome, which he declined to do, leaving it to the Jesuits to state their own case. Rome never replied to Challoner's petition for an American bishop. The bishop later discovered that the petition, made in a letter to Cardinal Spinelli and entered into the post of 1764, never left England. In Bishop Challoner's words, quote, it was opened and stopped on this side of the water, unquote. Whoever opened Challoner's letter must have passed its contents to the Church of England, for no sooner had Challoner posted his letter with the Anglican Bishop of London, who had thus far been content to rule his American subjects from London, asked the British cabinet to permit the Church of England to create an American bishop to, quote, attend the shepherdless flock in the colonies, unquote. When the word of this request reached the colonies, which were mostly Protestants but less than 15% Anglican, the reaction must have elated Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general. It says the sons and daughters of immigrants who had braved wild Indians and rattlesnakes to escape religious prelates took the bishop's petition to be the worst act of tyranny yet, and the most pressing cause for alarm, the number one thing to revolt against. Remembering that the Puritans and most of the Protestants were sick and tired of the religious order of England, both of the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England. And it said the American bishop scare was whipped up in the non-Anglican Protestant church pulpit, the era's most electrifying communications medium, that being the pulpit. So the pulpits were ablaze of this protest about the proposed intrusion of bishops into the new colonies, whether they be Catholic or Anglican. And it says Presbyterian and Congregationalist preachers representing nearly 50% of the churched colonists charged that an American bishop would be, quote, an ecclesiastical stamp act, which would strip Americans of all their liberties, civil as well as religious, and, quote, if submitted to, will at length grind us to powder, unquote. We're talking about religious persecution. And they were free of that, hopefully, after leaving Great Britain and Europe and coming to this country, this new country, to live a life in peace and sovereignty with Christ as their head and their Bible as their instruction, and the Holy Spirit as their teacher. And he says they warned that the American bishop would dominate the colonial governors and councils. Now, don't you know that they expected the first order of business of any bishop in the country would be to get control of the government? Okay? This is indicative of what he's saying here. He said they warned that an American bishop would dominate the colonial governors and councils, strengthen the position of the colonial oligarchy, and drive dissenters from political life with a test act requiring officials to state their religious preferences. Having brought the colonial governments under his control, the American bishop would then establish the Church of Rome in all the colonies and impose taxes for the support of its hierarchy. Now, don't you know they were all well familiar with the cost of being Roman Catholic and supporting that gold-plated hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. And it says in a letter in the New York Gazette, or Weekly Post Boy, for March 14th, 1768, charged that an American bishop would, quote, introduce a system of episcopal palaces, of pontifical revenues, of spiritual courts, and all the pomp, grandeur, luxury, and regalia of an American Lambeth, unquote, and Lambeth Palace being the residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury, head of all the English, the head of all England after the royal family. So they know this is going to not only be a troublesome situation, but a costly one as well. And it says an American bishop would transform Americans into a people, quote, compelled to fall upon their knees in the streets and adore the papal mitre as the apostolic tyrant rides by in his gilded equipage, unquote. Reverend Jonathan Mayhew, Doodleyan lecturer at Harvard, inveighed against popish idolatry in a famous and arguably prophetic sermon by that title, saying, quote, let the bishops get their foot in the stirrup, and their beast, the laity, will prance and flounce about to no purpose. Bishops will prove to be the Trojan horse by which popery will subjugate North America. Yes, indeed, prophetic words recorded for us in this book, Rulers of Evil, by F. Tupper Saucy. And the religious hierarchy in this country is the bane of this country, the demise of this country, and the Jesuits are the epitome of that baneful woe that has brought this country into subjection to the papacy in a church-state union, with the target of eventually persecuting all non-Catholics in this country. And if you were listening earlier, you heard Daryl Eberhardt talk about the Inquisition that's coming to this country. Daryl Eberhardt agrees with me about Rome's planned extirpation of heretics, Protestants, liberals, Jews, and Orthodox in this country. Anybody that won't bow to the Pope's temporal and spiritual authority in this country are going to be extirpated. Now, if anyone is familiar with the bloody history of the Roman Catholic Church, and particularly that of the Jesuits over the last nearly 500 years now, one has absolutely no right to even hope that they're not going to impose religious persecution in this country. And the title of this broadcast, Inquisition Update, is the perfect title for what is literally going to happen in this country. I'm not kidding about it. And many people who've never heard this for the first time think that I'm out to lunch. As many of my listeners on amateur radio think I'm out to lunch. But I wouldn't brave the criticism of such an absurd insinuation, to coin the phrase that George W. Bush used when asked if he had anything to do with 9/11. It's not an absurd insinuation. It's it's a virtual certainty if history is any judge of what the future will hold in this formerly Protestant, now becoming Catholic nation. And it's reiterated in this statement. It said, let the bishops get their foot in the stirrup, and their beast, the laity, will prance and flounce about to no purpose. Bishops will prove to be the Trojan horse by which popery will subject North America. And we're seeing it fulfilled right before our very eyes. If we're astute, if we're watching in prayer, paying attention to who the Bible forewarns will be this counterfeit system. I'm speaking specifically of Revelation chapter 13 and 17. And hopefully, I'll now that the holidays are over, I'll get Bill Hughes back on the broadcast. We'll continue our study, too, about Rome's involvement in this country and what role America plays in Bible prophecy and what we may look forward to in the future with the view of Bible prophecy in mind. Anyway, continuing the book, it says, the American bishop's scare did more to foment the colonists to revolt and eventually raise more soldiery than all the tyrannical writs and tax schemes combined. Immediately, it created permanent committees of correspondence, an intercolonial organization of churches, and a society of dissenters based in New York. These organizations brought all opposed to the Church of England into correspondence with each other, whether in American, Great Britain, or Ireland. The specter of an American bishop gave the colonial patriots an almost inexhaustible fund of propaganda to employ against any form of perceived tyranny at home and abroad. It served, in Jonathan Boucher's word, quote, to keep the public mind in a state of ferment and effervescence, to make the people jealous and suspicious of all measures not brought forward by popularly approved leaders, and above all, to train and habituate the people to opposition, stirring up trouble. And it says the fact that Americans were trained and habituated to oppose the British Crown and the Church of England, not by Roman Catholics but by Protestant churchmen, is, in my mind, proof of the Sun Tzuan ingenuity of Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general. He said, Sun Tzu said, quote, the general will know how to shape at will not only the army he is commanding, but also that of his enemies, unquote. While Ritchie's own army was appearing in the world's opinion markets to be a band of vicious dolts slipping down into their well-deserved oblivion. Remember, Lorenzo Ricci was creating the appearance that the Jesuit order were on the ropes and ready to be disbanded, and that they were no effect in the world, no threat to anyone but themselves. That was the Sun Tzuan ruse. Again, he says, while Ritchie's own army was appearing in the world's opinion markets to be a band of vicious dolts slipping down into their well-deserved oblivion, a small elite corps of indispensables, some neither knowing nor caring who their true boss was, were facilitating English-speaking Protestant churchgoers in systematically annihilating one another. Now, I want to ask the listeners, who do you suppose F. Tupper Saucy is insinuating here as this small elite corps of indispensables, some neither knowing nor caring who their true boss was? Now, their true boss is obviously Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general. But who is this small elite group? I believe he's talking specifically about Freemasons. that agent of the Black Pope, that unknowing, unwitting organization of Luciferian Freemasons who knowingly or unknowingly serve at the behest of the Black Pope. The Black Pope controls Freemasonry. And most of them don't know who their true boss is. None of them seem to know that the Jesuit general controls them. But this author, F. Tupper Saucy, does. And he says Lorenzo Ricci's orchestration had reached such fullness that he could now soliloquize Iago's boast in Othello, quote, "Now whether he kill Cassio, or Cassio him, or each do kill the other, every way makes my gain," unquote. And this is just another way of saying Lorenzo Ricci was a master at creating a win-win situation for himself and a lose-lose situation for his enemy, and he never even had to lift a sword or shed a drop of blood. No matter which way the situation goes, Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general, benefits. Everything suits the aim and the purpose of the Jesuit general. He is the epitome of a Sun Tzuan warrior, and he manipulates his enemies' soldiers every bit as effectively as he manipulates his own. And both his own warriors and that of his enemies are completely oblivious to what his plan of battle is and what his objective is, or even when the battle will take place. When one begins to conceive in his mind exactly how Lorenzo Ricci was playing this out, he's left, as I am, awed at the diabolical strategy, at the genius of war-making of Lorenzo Ricci as instructed by Sun Tzu. It says back in the 1960s and 70s, Central American Jesuits designed posters to motivate campesinos to overthrow corrupt politicians. The posters for this Bellarminian liberation theology depicted an angry Jesus Christ in the image of Che Guevara, swathed in fatigues, draped in bullet belts, holding a submachine gun at the ready, a Rambo Jesus, a Jesus whose sacred heart called for social action that included killing. And the American bishop scare aroused the same dynamic in the 1770s. And we'll continue more with the reading of Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy when we return from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update. Stay tuned for the message, and we'll be right back.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis. as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, keep this broadcast on the air, please support First Amendment Radio, who pays the bills. And just hope and pray that the Spirit of God lead you to do what's best with this information. And that is to share it with family and friends, and help your friends and family to tune into the broadcast. Make these subjects a topic of discussion, both at home and at church. It's time to awaken God's people to the reality of this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, and to prepare ourselves both spiritually and temporally for this Holy Roman Inquisition that is certain to come. Now, backing up, the author, F. Tupper Saucy, alludes to a subject that we addressed months ago in some of Ronald Cook's writings. He's talking about the liberation theology movement in Central America. He says back in the 1960s and 70s, Central American Jesuits designed posters to motivate campesinos to overthrow corrupt politicians. The posters for this Bellarminian liberation theology depicted an angry Jesus Christ in the image of Che Guevara, swathed in fatigues, draped in bullet belts, holding a machine gun at the ready, a Rambo Jesus, a Jesus whose Sacred Heart called for social action that included killing. Now, before I continue the reading, I want to bring to bear a subject that he only brushes over here, and that is the Sacred Heart. He says, a Jesus whose Sacred Heart, capital S and capital H, called for social action that included killing. Sacred Heart is one of the many, many, many sodalities of the Roman Catholic Church, an organization of lay people in the Roman Catholic Church who serve the purpose of the Roman Catholic Church in their occupations and in their avocations. And they are organized. They are essentially Minutemen in the Pope's army. And ultimately they serve the Jesuit general. The Jesuit general oversees all the many, many lay organizations that serve the papacy. And Sacred Heart is an organization that operates in this country, as well as Central America and around the world. And their purpose is to steer the social agenda. They call themselves Social Action or Catholic Action. In Croatia, they were known as Ustashi. That means Catholic Action, Ustashi. And their purpose is to serve the extirpation of Protestantism, to change the social condition in this country to be more receptive to Catholicism. And I'm sure that Sacred Heart plays a great role in the ecumenical movement to spread this hopeful desire of ecumenism, to unite the Protestants with the Roman Catholic Church, to tear down the old animosities between the Protestants and the Papal Church. And Sacred Heart is instrumental in that and many, many, many other social aspects of life in this country, remembering that they serve the Pope. And it says the American bishop scare aroused the same dynamic in the 1770s. What was considered by many to be the most influential sermon on the subject was preached by Boston's Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company. Was preached to Boston's Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company by Reverend Jonathan Mayhew's successor at Harvard, Reverend Simeon Howard. Simeon Howard received his early preaching experience in Nova Scotia, or Acadia, as the French settlers called it. He experienced firsthand the uprooting and expulsion by British soldiers of some 3,000 French Catholic Acadians, along with their Jesuit priests. Cruelly, often violently, the Acadians were forced to immigrate to various American colonies with no compensation for property or livestock. Longfellow memorialized the event in his Evangeline. With a casuistry that would have delighted Cardinal Bellarmine, Reverend Howard's famous artillery company sermon openly advocated the use of violence against a political tyrant. Our duty to defend personal liberty and property, he argued, is stated in the Scriptures in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, quote, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free," unquote. True, Reverend Howard admitted Christ requires us to resist not evil, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, Matthew chapter 5, and, quote, "Recompense no man for evil, avenge not yourselves," unquote, Romans chapter 12, verse 17 and 19. But these precepts apply only to cases of small injuries, Howard said, not large ones, such as tyranny. Nor, said Reverend Howard, nor, said Reverend Howard, should we fully accept Christ's commandments on property. Quote, love not the world, nor the things that are in the world, unquote, John chapter 2, verse 5. And, quote, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, unquote, Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. And still further, quoting, give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away, unquote, Matthew chapter 5, verse 42. Such precepts as these, Reverend Howard said, are, quote, indefinite expressions, unquote, which, quote, we have a right to limit, unquote. Now, the defensive application of lethal force is reasonable and noble and patriotic, but it is not recommended by Jesus Christ. The Jesus of the Scriptures cautions that life by the sword means death by the sword. It is Rome, not Jesus, that commands the use of lethal force. Rome, whose natural law society was built on the willingness of the individual to risk his own life in killing to preserve the religious state. And it was Rome that Simeon Howard beseeched his audience to emulate. Quote, Rome, who rose to be mistress of the world by an army composed of men of property and wealth, unquote. Now, this is the contention that I have with many Christians, and I'm severely condemned by many for agreeing with the author here, F. Tupper Saucy. And many say it's a sin for me not to store up weapons and arms and bullets and guns to help fight a revolution against this oppressive government. But I think the Scriptures support my position of nonviolence, and I let the Bible be my sword. And if they put me in the prison, if they turn me over to the magistrates, I'll let Christ speak for me. And if they decide to kill me, then my blood mingles with the rest of the martyrs of Christ throughout the centuries. But I don't have it in my heart to take the life of another human being. That's Rome's modus operandi, and she's demonstrated that throughout her history. And on that basis alone, I am non-aggressive. The aggression that I show forth, it comes from my mouth, and it's based on history and the Word of God. If the truth can't motivate others to speak the truth, then I have no weapon at all. At least not as effective to motivate. But only those who are driven by the Spirit hear the Spirit's voice. Those who have an eye to see and an ear to hear what the Spirit of truth says. And I once had a discussion with a dear friend of mine who I highly respect. And we had a discussion about this. He takes the opposite view, that God's people ought to arm themselves and repress this oppressive church-state union that Rome is forcing upon us and bringing about this certain Holy Roman Inquisition to extirpate, to annihilate, and exterminate God's people in this country. And he simply said, Tom, I'm not going to a concentration camp. And I understand. But I only repeat the words of Christ. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So whatever position you take on this matter, it belongs between you and God. And I expect and hope that I will be respected for taking an opposite approach. It says, a decade after the American bishop scare had broken out, thousands of American Protestants and Catholic churchgoers began killing and being killed to win the war that would keep Anglican bishops out of America. And they won this war. But the utterly stupefying outcome of their victory was that no bishops were kept out of America. 2 bishops were brought into America, an Anglican and a Roman Catholic. So F. Tupper Saucy has just validated his nonviolent attitude. He's justified the scriptures that war did break out. Killing did occur. And it still didn't keep the Anglicans and the Catholics, bishops, out of this country. He says the Roman Catholic, of course, was John Carroll. This Jesuit son of Maryland was consecrated Bishop of Baltimore on August 15, 1790, in the chapel of Lulworth, a castle set high on the Dorset coast of England, owned by the Welds, a prominent Roman Catholic family. Lulworth's upper Red Room looks to the east upon a commanding view of the estate's long entrance meadow, and to the south upon a famous smuggler's cove in the distance. A frequent visitor to Lulworth Castle, an honored guest in its Red Room, I am told, was King George III. Bishop Carroll became the Holy See's direct representative not just in Baltimore but throughout the United States. This fact was validated in 1798 by Judge Addison, president of the Court of Common Pleas of the Fifth Circuit of Pennsylvania, in the case of Fromm versus Carroll. Fromm was a recalcitrant German Franciscan who wanted to establish his own German-speaking, laity-owned parish. Addison ruled that, quote, the Bishop of Baltimore has sole episcopal authority over the Catholic Church of the United States, and without authority from him, no Catholic priest can exercise any pastoral function over any congregation within the United States, unquote. Fromm was excommunicated and held up as an example of what happens to rebels against wholesome church authority. Addison's use of the term Catholic Church of the United States is an interesting judicial notice that Carroll's ordination instituted, for all practical purposes, a secular church ruled by the Black Papacy. Remember that John Carroll was a Jesuit trained. He was Jesuit priest. And it says, eminent Catholic historian Thomas O'Gorman concurred in 1895, observing that American Catholicism was, quote, in its inception wholly a Jesuit affair and has largely remained so, unquote. Why? Because it was formed by the first bishop of this country, a Jesuit priest by the name of John Carroll. And that's a concept that I've never known before until I read this book. And it says America's first Anglican bishop, ordained in 1784, was Reverend Samuel Seabury of Connecticut. Reverend Seabury was both a high churchman and a Freemason. To avoid the political repercussions of swearing allegiance to the Church of England so soon after 1776, Seabury was consecrated in November of 1784 at Aberdeen, Scotland. Of critical importance to Rome was that the 3 bishops consecrating Seabury were all, quote, unquote, non-juring bishops. Non-juring described the class of Catholic bishops that stood in the succession of Jacobite clergy who, remaining loyal to King James II after his abdication in 1689, had refused to take a loyalty oath to James' successor, his daughter, Mary Stuart, and son-in-law, William of Orange, both Protestants. America's first Protestant bishop, like his Roman Catholic counterpart, owed allegiance to Rome. So here you have both the Anglican and the Roman Catholic bishoprics in this country, both owing allegiance to the Vatican. I mean, Lorenzo Ricci is absolute genius. It says, this obscure fact is commemorated in one of London's most heavily trafficked and world-famous locations. The spacious grassy lawns on either side of the great stairway leading up to the National Portrait Gallery facing Trafalgar Square are identical except for their bronze statuary, one piece alone placed at the center of each lawn. In the north lawn stands James II, crowned with imperial laurel, wearing the armor of Julius Caesar. An elderly British Jesuit with a passion for offbeat historical detail confided to me that James loved to go in Caesarean drag. It says, on the south lawn stands the celebrated Howden figure of George Washington, garbed in period attire, leaning for support upon a huge bundle of rods from which project the head of an axe, the fasces, ancient emblem of Roman legal authority. Did you know this? Did you know that there's a statue of George Washington leaning upon a fasces, an emblem of Roman legal authority? Is there a connection between George Washington and the Roman Catholic Church? Was our first president Catholic? It says, when Bishop Seabury united his episcopate with the other two Anglican communions in America in 1789, the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States was born. George Washington was a member of this church. The London statuary are explaining the little-known historical fact that James II's Roman Catholic rulership of the English-speaking people was resumed in the first president of the constitutional United States of America. It is a tribute to the phenomenal generalate of Lorenzo Ricci. John Carroll spent his final years in Europe helping to develop Lorenzo Ricci's vision of rebellion in America. He moved cautiously and often incognito. What few traces he left behind are quite revealing. Stunning information, in my estimation. Facts that were never even alluded to in the history books when I was in high school. That George Washington, a statue of him leaning upon a fasces, an emblem of Roman legal authority. Now, I knew George Washington was a Freemason, and for most of my life that had no significance for me. It certainly does now. The possibility exists that through Freemasonry, George Washington was working for the Jesuit general. But now we see other evidence in this statue in Great Britain of our first president leaning upon a fasces, depicting his respect for Roman legal authority. It's stunning information for me. Now, maybe somebody would argue, well, Tom, you're making too much of it. Well, maybe I am. But it's puzzling. Anyway, the next chapter, chapter 17, page 155 of the book, is called A Timely Grand Tour. Now, this is one of the most revealing and stunning chapters in this book. And I almost wish John Daniel were here to help me discuss this. And as a matter of fact, I'll read a little bit of it. We're coming up on the end of the broadcast. I've only got 2 or 3 more minutes left, and I don't have time to develop much. I may, for Tuesday's broadcast, get a hold of John and see if he wouldn't join me on the broadcast Tuesday and read this chapter together and let him comment on this. I had a brief conversation with him over the phone about this, and all of this was news to me. And it's an incredible insinuation. John Carroll went on tour in Europe, and it appears that he and a student were touring Europe to gather funds, lots of money, just prior to the revolution. And he says among many British visitors to Rome during Clement XIV's sweetening toward England in the early 1770s was a young member of an ancient ruling family of Dorset and Somerset counties named Charles Philippe Stourton. Charles Philippe was nephew to the Dukes of Norfolk. Remember the Norfolks, Thomas and Edward Howard, for their significant contributions to American independence. Thomas, originator of colonial Freemasonry. Edward, coupler of Lord Bute to the future George II. Now we're seeing Freemasonry's operations on both the colonies and in Great Britain, manipulating the powers that controlled. Now, I've run out of time. We'll return to this tomorrow on the broadcast. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Stay tuned for more godly teaching on First Amendment Radio. I'll see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.